Well, we looked at smart objects in the last lesson, and the perfect follow-up to that is smart filters. Smart filters are a way for us to non-destructively apply filters to our images inside of Photoshop. It's pretty neat. If you think about it, you can apply all the filters you want, and they're never permanent. You can always go back and change. Now, the reason why I said it's a good follow-up is because your layer's got to be a smart object before you can apply smart filters to it. Get the whole smart thing that they got going on. And if you convert it to a smart object already, then you can just go add a filter. It'll automatically add a smart filter. In this example here, I want to blur the background photo. So I'm going to click on that bottom layer. Now, this image we created in the last lesson. If you didn't create it or you didn't watch the last lesson and you don't care about me, that's fine. No, you can you just go and open up that image from the last lesson. It's I just created a PSD file and you can pick up where we left off. If you want to learn about smart objects and everything we did in that last lesson, make sure you go back and check it out. So I'm going to click on that bottom layer here, go up to the filter menu, and you'll see it says convert for smart filters, which means it's going to turn it into a smart object layer. But mine is already a smart object layer, and that's why it's grayed out here. Okay, but if it wasn't a smart object layer, you'd have to convert it first. And convert for smart filters, it's really just kind of code for turning it into a smart object. Now I'm going to go down to the blur menu. Let's go to Gaussian blur. And let's add, let's say maybe, let's go with a 6 pixel blur on this and hit OK. When you do that, take a look at the layers palette. See how the layer changed. It almost looks like it's got a layer style on it because it's got these little things underneath it, just like our layer styles do. Well, this is a smart filter. Okay, it says Gaussian blur right there, which means I can turn it off just like I could a layer style. I can turn off the Gaussian blur, see how it's not in the background anymore. I can turn it back on. I can come up here, I can click on Gaussian blur, and it opens up the Gaussian blur dialog, and now I can change the settings because that's the whole point here is nothing that we're doing is permanent. This is all non-destructive stuff. These smart filter layers are not permanently affecting your layer. So you can always go back and change them. All right? So another reason why it's a good follow-up to smart objects is because in this example here, I actually used a blur on the background layer for this web design for the portfolio because I wanted to take the focus off of the background photo. Now, I can leave this here just like I could when I had this as a smart object. I can save this as a PSD file. When I open it up, the Gaussian blur is still going to be here as a smart filter layer, which means if I want to swap out photos, I just come up to the layer menu, go down to Smart Objects, choose Replace Contents, and just like we did in that last video, just replace it with another photo. Hit Place. Not only did it change everything like we expected it to, because you saw the last video on Smart Objects, it kept the layer styles and everything, but it also kept the Gaussian blur that was applied to this layer. That's attached to the Smart Object layer, which means that if I look at this photo and I decide that the blur is too much for the background layer, I can double click on Gaussian blur and I can bring that radius setting down and I can change the blur after the fact. So that's the advantage of using a smart filter layer with smart objects in the way we did in that last lesson, because nothing is permanent. But there's also some other advantages here. Let's go open up. This is a photo from one of the other lessons. You could use any photo for this. What we want to create is a soft focus effect. All right. To recreate that in Photoshop, we've got to blur the layer. But if we blur the layer right now, we're making a permanent change. If I go up to the filter menu, I can convert this for a smart filter. And remember, we didn't convert this yet. This is an image I just opened. All right, so it's a JPEG image, one layer, background layer. So let's convert for smart filters. You'll see that nothing really changes other than now it looks exactly like a smart object layer did. It even says smart object when you hover over it. So now let's go up to the filter menu, go down to blur. I'm going to choose Gaussian blur, and I'm going to crank up the radius here up to about 10 pixels or so. All right, hit OK. And then another option with the smart filters is that they have opacity. Now I can drop the opacity of just the blur, not the opacity of the layer, because that's going to make it transparent. I don't want that. I want to drop the opacity of the Gaussian blur filter. To do that, there's a little icon on the right-hand side. Just double-click on that guy. It opens up what's called blending options. I could change the blend mode inside here if I wanted to. You can see how things change. But I can also, more importantly, change the opacity and fade the blurring, fade the Gaussian blur filter. All right, so I'm kind of liking that. I like it somewhere around 75-80%. I think looks pretty good. See how we get this nice blend between the sharp image and the soft focused Gaussian blur layer. So I'm going to hit OK and leave it as is. The main problem I've got here is that I do want to see the details, especially the eyes, but mostly the face here. I want to see those a little bit sharper. Well, your smart filter layer comes with a mask. All right, this mask is not associated with the layer on top here. It's associated with the smart filter, which means that I can hide parts of the smart filter. Just like I would on a regular mask, it works exactly the same. So I'm going to take my brush tool. I'm going to set my foreground color over to black, and I'm also going to come and drop the opacity of the brush down to about 45-50% here, because I don't want to hide totally. I just want to fade it away a little bit, and I'm going to make the brush roughly the size of her face, and I'm just going to click. And you see the filter layer over here. See the filter mask? It's got that little black dot. I'm going to click again. And maybe one more time. And now what I've done is I've brought in the details of her face more into focus, but I still keep that very soft focus effect throughout the rest of the photo. If you want to see what it looks like without the Gaussian blur, click on the eyeball icon. Click on that to turn it on and off. If you want to see what it looks like without the mask applied to it, and this works for regular masks too. It's not just the smart filter masks. You can hold down your shift key and click on the mask itself, and you're going to see that X goes through it. So that turns off the mask, and then if you hold down the shift key again and click on the X, it turns the mask back on. Okay, so that's a tip for you. Regardless of what mask you're working on, that's how you can see it. Okay, so make sure you get in the habit of trying to use smart filters wherever you can, because now I can save this image, and if I open it up in a week or a month or however it is later, as long as I save it as a PSD file, I can come inside here, I can change my blur settings. Maybe if I print it and it doesn't look quite as good, maybe it looks fine on screen, but the printed version doesn't look good, and I need to change the blur amount, I can come inside of here and do it, and I don't have to recreate the whole effect all over again.